Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Battleship New Jersey led a charmed life during World War II and received no meaningful damage throughout the entire war. However, recently, through comparing multiple different reports about the same incidents, we've been able to find some information about, I wouldn't say damage to the ship, but occasions on which the ship was struck. So Battleship New Jersey was never struck by direct enemy action. However, during enemy engagements, the ship was struck by shrapnel. Depending on the occasion, sometimes that shrapnel came from aircraft that the battleship or other ships in the formation shot down and crashed nearby. And in some cases, it was shrapnel from friendly fire. Say a 40mm gun bursts over the ship. Well, now that flak comes down and lands on the ship. And we have found evidence of a couple of crew members that were wounded during these engagements. So we were aware of one crew member who was previously wounded because of a 5-inch shell from a friendly ship that went through the roof, the overhead of the head that he was in, that caused shrapnel wounds to him. He did not receive a Purple Heart. The ship was in port, and the ship outside that was shooting its guns that had an unfused round crashed through New Jersey's deck was just conducting an anti-aircraft drill. However, the sailors who we found were wounded on board during these actions, even the ones by friendly fire, would have been eligible for Purple Hearts, and I assume they received them. So, an interesting thing in looking at this is, one, the battleship is supremely heavily armored, but large portions of the crew are out on deck, because that's where the anti-aircraft guns are. The guns themselves have splinter shields on the faces, and they would be in gun tubs, most of which have been cut away by now, but they would be approximately 3 feet tall, so a little bit over waist high. When we were on USS Slater, we got to see some of these gun tubs that are still installed on that ship in her World War II configuration. Interestingly, the tubs cannot be high enough to fully protect you because the gun has to be able to depress and elevate and slew around to the maximum extent possible. So it provides some protection, but not total protection. And while the gunner for the 20mm gun is behind these shields, the guys running ammunition from the ready service lockers to the gun are not. So it seems like all of the wounds were sustained by sailors who were topside to their upper bodies, the part that is not covered by this shield. So the guy using the gun is going to be tucked back under it like this, but the guy coming to reload the ammunition is going to be standing up here, again, fully exposed, and they'd be wearing a helmet above their head, the old M1 steel pots, but the lower part of their face and neck is exposed. So, the two separate engagements we have, Sunday, 29 October 1944, so this is part of the Leyte Gulf campaign. We have a Seaman First Class Kos from the Navy Reserve who was struck in the eye by a piece of shrapnel while at General Quarters Station during enemy air attack. Patient was immediately taken to sick bay and treated for foreign body, traumatic, left eye, intraocular, and admitted to sick bay. Seaman First Class Lindley, also U.S. Navy Reserve, received foreign body traumatic left cheek when he was struck on the cheek by a piece of shrapnel during General Quarters and during enemy air attack, treated at sick bay, and returned to duty. So another interesting thing about this is individual logs aren't all that helpful. This log mentions the wounds that happened on board, but it doesn't mention much about the engagement itself. Where does that shrapnel come from? Thankfully, during World War II, there were several different logs being kept, many of which have been digitized by the National Archives. So there are the ship's deck logs, which talk specifically about what happens on this ship, sailors being admitted to sick bay, number of rounds expended, things like that. There are after-action reports. So after a specific engagement, usually after a campaign, one will be drawn up for each day of that campaign. One will be drawn up which covers each day of that campaign, and it talks more about like the specific stuff happening during that action. There is the war log. That is more of a formal document that it seems like after the handwritten deck log is recorded, somebody goes through and types it up into the war log, and then it's edited somewhat. Interestingly, some information in the war log does not show up in any of the other reports, so I'm not sure what additional reports that we don't have that they're drawing that information from. Other sources include task force battle reports. So while each ship submits a battle report, individual task forces are also submitting reports, and so those talk about the broader engagement as opposed to this ship's one specific role in it. And then finally, at the end of the war, a command history was produced, which seems to draw information from most of these sources, but again, not all. It has some information that doesn't seem to show up in any others, so I'm not sure what additional sources it's drawing from. Anyway, you cannot get a full picture from one report. You have to go to all of them, which is why it's important that the National Archives is digitizing and making all of these available to researchers. All right, so that first bit I read was from the deck log. Here's the same incident from the war diary. 12:10, received report from control that 2 men of 20mm group number 20, here's an interesting thing, we're not sure where the various 20mm groups were. We don't know how they were labeled. Group 20 presumably is back here at the fantail near where we are today. Even numbers tend to be the port side. We're on the starboard side. Odd numbers tend to be the starboard side. But we're not entirely sure how the different gun mounts were numbered, but we are fairly certain it would have been on the main deck back aft here. 2 men on 20mm gun group number 20 had received what appeared to be minor injuries from shrapnel. Minor structural damage was also inflicted in the area near port after deck winch, apparently from 40mm. That report makes it seem like the big gun structure aft of turret 3 here was likely the one that they were manning. It makes sense. Seaman first class, they're non-rates. Those tend to be the ones that are in exposed positions on deck. And it mentioned the aft winch. The damage seems to be inflicted by aircraft crashing nearby the ship. During this engagement, 3 crashed near the battleship, 2 on the starboard side and 1 on the port side. So when they crashed and exploded, it seems like some of the shrapnel came up on deck, caught the winch, maybe some of the splinter shieldings around those guns, and caught 2 of those sailors in their upper bodies. A third wound that we found, in this one, a Seaman First Class Carboon from the Navy Reserves. It's listed as gunshot left cheek. He seems to have been at primary control, which I believe would be the 08 bridge at that time, which again, much like the gun tubs, has a about waist-high shield around it, which makes sense that he's receiving a facial laceration. It says a gunshot. What I expect happened was a piece of shrapnel, possibly a spent round, struck the gun shield, disintegrated, and came up into his face. The rest of the report doesn't read like the man received a 20mm gunshot to the face. In this instance, it appears that the damage was from friendly fire. Because New Jersey was the fleet flagship, she was at the center of the formation, as opposed to other battleships normally being around the edges of the formations where they can provide effective anti-aircraft support. Because she was at the center of the formation, when aircraft come in to attack the carriers, which were the primary targets, the ships around the ring start firing in towards those aircraft, which means that any shots that miss have the chance of hitting the ships at the center of the formation, the carriers themselves, or this battleship operating dead center in the middle of the group. And so it seems like, even though the battleship was not at any significant risk from enemy damage throughout the war, friendly fire, or shrapnel from planes that she had successfully shot down still posed a significant risk to the low-ranked crew members that were stuck out on deck at relatively unshielded positions. We have not gone through all of our reports yet. Both of these are from mid-October of '44, so the fact that we've got 2 from this engagement makes it incredibly likely that we're going to find more during other severe engagements, like the kamikaze actions off Okinawa, or the Marianas turkey shoot. Do you expect to see more facial injuries like the ones we've seen because of how the ship is shielded? Or would you expect to see injuries to a greater part of the body? Or do you think because we're on a battleship, there probably won't be any other injuries at all? Let us know in the comment section down below. It seems like because of all the exploding rounds, shrapnel wounds to exposed body parts was the major threat. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. It's what allows us to go through and do this kind of deep research. There's a link to continue supporting us in the description below. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and the museum. Thanks for watching.